attention deficit. Hey, there she is. Hi, Amanda. I'm I don't know if you can hear me. I would love to go ahead and make you as a speaker. I've got replays on, so anyone that's not joining us live now will be able to listen on the replay. Yay! Hi, Manny. There we go. Okay, so I was just getting ready to get started with a definition, just a standard definition of ADHD. It stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, and it is a medical condition. Now, a person with ADHD has differences in brain development, brain activity, and it doesn't just affect attention, it affects behavior, the way we learn. It can affect children at school, and it also can affect your relationships and friendships. So, I'm just going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Amanda if you're ready. And
I'm ready.
are you ready? So,
Okay, I just
yay.
want to make sure that you can hear everybody. Well, everyone.
Yes,
The replay
yes.
people can hear me too, and you can hear me.
Replay
All
can
right,
people.
awesome,
Yes. Awesome.
awesome.
Yes.
All
So,
right.
yeah, go ahead.
So basically, I have been recently, within the last year, diagnosed with ADHD after really struggling my whole life and not knowing why. And I was just having this conversation today with a new client I just onboarded, and she's definitely like neurotypical, quote unquote, because she's, very process oriented, and those in the past, that's been a huge challenge for me because I'm not, like, well, in a way I am, but like, I like my own processes, but other people's processes make me confused, right? We're not confused, but they just don't stick as well. So, I was telling her, like, and she's from Europe, so I don't know if it's quite as much of a thing, and not that it's not a thing in Europe, but
Well, I see what you're
I think in
saying. Yeah.
America,
Because in
yeah,
America,
it's
we have so many more distractions.
yeah, oh yeah, and I think that here it's been like mental health is so taboo, whereas in other countries, you might tell somebody, I have depression or I have anxiety or I have ADHD in another country, and then be like, oh, okay, but here it's like, oh, so it's just a different like outlook, I guess, on ADHD. But I was
For
telling
sure.
her how my whole life I was spacey. And that's how you're known as a elementary school student, right? Especially girls,
Mm-hmm.
it presents as either too talkative or
Mm-hmm.
out in outer space. And I can vividly remember sitting in classes thinking about whatever, not what was going on, like what I would do when I would get home, or a computer game I was playing with, or like a movie. I would be playing it in my head, and I was not present.
Mm-hmm.
And to remember that so clearly, it's like there was something different with me from the go. And
Mm.
all just and living that,
Oh,
and
you were cutting out a little bit.
first of all, you
Sorry, I couldn't hear
develop
you. It was breaking up a little bit. Um,
poor connection. Hold on.
okay.
It says poor connection. So,
Well, you're
hold
back
on.
now.
I'm in the car.
It's
I'm
working.
in the car. So,
Yeah.
okay. All right. Well, if I go away, it's probably because I just am in a bad part of town with the whatever.
Yes.
Um.
Well, but
So,
that's like
so
an
you develop coping
important point to
mechanisms.
have. Mm-hmm.
And I was telling her, as far as that goes, I strove for perfection to to cover up
Mm-hmm.
those those times where I wasn't paying attention. So I'm the one that's like, okay, I have to write a perfect paper, but I'm going to write it in the 8 hours before it's due kind of
Right. And you
person.
become an overachiever in that way, but
Yeah,
a procrastinating overachiever. And I think that
yeah,
that's an
yeah.
important point that you made, Amanda, is that it does present, ADHD presents itself very differently between little males and females and as adults. So, with little boys who are ADHD, it's very, the hyperactive part of it is more prominent, and it through biological differences. Little girls, I know for me, I was exactly the same. I was a daydreamer, and I can vividly remember um, just kind of being in my own little world, not at all
Yep.
paying attention, but being able to get caught up at the last minute. But what the biggest struggle for me, even more so than daydreaming, it was for me, the self esteem issue of seeing things, tasks, especially what is called in the clinical term as executive function, which is
Yes.
basically a fancy term for a quote unquote adulting. So, like getting your homework turned in on time, being
Yep.
able to be on time, letting the time get away from you, especially when for a developing brain, it's so difficult to manage that. And I mean, I'm 41 now, and I still struggle with that. It's so
Right.
hard to see all of your fellow classmates, all of your peers do things that come so easily to them, but is so hard for you. And you
Yeah.
and I have talked about that before because it affects your self-esteem, down to your core. So go ahead, continue what you were saying. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I have a poor connection again, so I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. It says poor connection. So if I happen to go out, then that's why.
Sure.
So yeah, and, executive dysfunction. That's I think that's probably the hardest part. Like I could deal with being a little bit daydreamy and
Mhm.
that expectation that society has,
Mhm.
and for it to be easy for you to turn in, paperwork or pay a bill. I mean,
Right.
those kind of things. Like I got a reminder that I had a bill overdue, and it came to my a text message. All I had to do was click on it and pay. And I looked at it and I said, I'll do it later. And like,
Mhm.
it's that frustration of knowing that you should do this, but you just can't make yourself do it. And it's hard to explain to
Mhm.
people, right? It's
Right, it is.
like, what
And
do you mean you can't pay a bill?
yeah, it's really hard. Amanda, thank you so much for sharing. This is the first time that I've started this chat, and I would like to do it every Friday. So since it's the first time, it's me and you, but there is a replay, and it looks like that we may have one more follower who is kind of in and out. So this is just like the very first time that I'm opening up this room here on Clubhouse to talk about it. So today, it's just going to be kind of the basics. Some people may not even know what ADHD is or what
Hmm.
causes it. Especially, I wanted another topic to be, one of the discussions we have is how do you best support a loved one or a significant
Hmm.
other? Because it can be very frustrating because just for example, my husband, he is a very punctual person. He is a
Hmm.
very task driven, like, and it is hard, especially in the beginning of our marriage. It was hard for him to understand why I wouldn't just do it. Like there were just so many. For me, it was a mental block. It was, and
Hmm.
then the depression that enters in. So, this is just a starting point, because it is still in the medical world. It is still not clear what causes the brain differences of ADHD.
Hmm.
There is a lot of evidence that it is hereditary.
Hmm.
So many kids who have ADHD may have a parent or a relative with it. Um, it's also, there are some studies shown in the research that I've done that children who are premature can be
Hmm.
more at risk if they're born early. And there's also some, suggestions for environmental toxins. And of course, there is a whole discussion about screen time. There's actually, it's ADHD is not caused by too much screen time. It's like
Right.
the whole thing. It's not caused by poor parenting or eating
Hmm.
sugar. Like there are just so many myths out there that's like, oh, I got ADHD because I was an 80s kid and sat in front of Nickelodeon all the time. Like that
Right.
does not in and of itself cause ADHD, but it does require, a diagnosis. And,
Hmm.
back in our day, in
Mhm.
the time whenever we were school age, late 80s, early 90s, ADHD was not even known among little boys, really. I mean, it was not talked about.
Mhm.
And so, of course, when it was started to be studied and diagnosed and entered into the DSM, which at the time we know now we have the DSM 5, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Disorders, and all of the case studies were little boys,
Mhm.
and it was just more obvious at the time because of not being able to stay in their seat. And while I did have that trouble at times, it was more of an inattentive daydreaming, um, you know, and then it for me it manifested itself as anxiety and
Mhm.
depression. And so I know my story and yours. I mean, you and I, we were not diagnosed with this until we were in adulthood. And who
Exactly.
knows, yeah. And it's not that I mean, I started going to counseling at 15 years old, but for a different reason. I was
Mhm.
having depression. There was, my a divorce in my family that really it was affecting me, and I was having all of these, issues dealing with childhood trauma, which is a topic for another day. But
Oh gosh, yes.
yeah. So and I was, as you know, but I don't mind to share on here. I was raised by a single dad, and so you can imagine, a single dad of three teenagers, like he was immediately, we've got to get some help. And so
Mhm.
the counseling, the therapist, the psychiatrist that I started seeing as a teen, it presented itself as depression. Well, what do you do for anyone with depression? You give them
Mhm.
antidepressants. And so I mean, it did help me with the depression, but it also kind of put me over to more of the hyperactive. Like it wasn't the right diagnosis and it wasn't the right
Mhm.
medication to treat what I needed to be treated. So then at 19, I was misdiagnosed again with bipolar disorder because they
Mhm.
just kept, raising the dosage of depression medications. Well, and of course, that's what's going to happen. You're
Yep.
going
Yep.
to be, over medicated on, and you do become hyper. I quit sleep, I've always have had trouble sleeping, from childhood, just from having
Yeah.
nightmares and things like that from trauma. But it became worse. And so what does every college student do to put an easy button on their pain is a lot of,
Partying,
partying,
drinking.
yes. I mean, my
Yep.
major was Bud Lightology. The first time I went to Marshall University, my minor was all the bars up and down Fourth Avenue, which anyone
Uh
who
huh.
is a Marshall University, Huntington, West Virginia grad, Old Main, the main building for the school is right there on Fourth Avenue, and all of the fun clubs are right up and down.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that was what I minored in. And but our brains do not. I also read this in my research that our brains do not fully develop to their potential until we turn 25. 25,
Oh
Amanda.
wow.
Like, I mean,
Wow.
so you think about those early 20s years. I was so
Uh
lost.
huh.
Who the
Oh
heck
yeah.
knows what they want to do with the rest of their life then
No, I
anyway?
mean, I'm doing
Yeah.
something completely different than I thought I would be doing.
Right.
So, yeah, and that's a whole other topic of like, why are we asking 18-year-olds to take out a huge amounts
Yes.
of loans and not know what they want to do? But that's another chat for another
It
day.
is. It is. And we can
But
address that too. We can create a whole
yeah,
new club about societal expectations and
gosh,
we just,
yeah.
it could be a podcast even of itself, but
Oh, for
this is
sure, for
just
sure.
yeah, this is just kind of the basics, that's a little bit kind of the beginning of my story. I still did not get diagnosed with ADHD until I was after I had my first kid, and I had been I was not taking any medication for the first time in 15 years. So, like,
Mhm.
and I felt better. Like, I felt better
Mhm.
off antidepressants, which makes no sense, but I just could not concentrate. And of course, as a
Yeah.
new mom, you're exhausted anyway.
Yep.
So, I went to a new doctor, and immediately they were like, well I don't think you're bipolar. This is wrong. Like I spent so many years thinking that I was like, but between the manic, hyper, and then depressed, she was like,
Mhm.
"Why don't we test you for ADHD?" So I went in to this clinic, and it took like 4 or 5 hours. I was there. They did IQ tests. They did all of these responsive tests, and it was like off the charts. that I had
Yeah.
ADHD.
Wow.
And so once you get that diagnosis, I mean, I struggled all through school to make C's just to pass. Like
Mhm.
and it was not necessarily that I didn't have the intelligence or ability to do it because as I went through that testing process, my IQ was higher than what I expected it to be, but they said that my
Mhm.
response time, it was complete inattentiveness. So, to kind of wrap it up for today, we can talk about how ADHD is treated. And it's
Mhm.
usually a combination of things. My treatment consisted immediately of medicine and behavior therapy. There are therapists that specialize in helping kids with their social emotional skills, but it's different for adults when you don't get diagnosed with an adulthood like that. That part of it is it's kind of like you need best ways to respond to adulting. And
Mhm.
so for me, the diagnosis was life changing in the fact that I was able to go back to college and I was a non-traditional student and finished a 4-year degree and not to be braggadocious, but I made straight A's. I made straight A's for the first time
Yeah.
in my life in college, being on
Yep.
medication and in therapy. So,
Yeah, and that's kind of my story. Well, I got good grades, but I had it was more of a hyper focus thing for me. And
mhm,
that's another whole part of ADHD that, we can find something that gives us that dopamine hit and it feels so good and we just want to keep doing it. And, I remember I told the girl that today in college, it was grad school, and they said, well, you shouldn't be taking 4 classes. You should only be taking 3. You can't do this. That's what they said to me.
ugh.
And I was like, okay, well, watch, like, watch me. And I got straight A's that time.
Yeah,
But at what cost? And that's, I think,
right.
across my whole life. Like, yeah, I did that, but at what cost? Anxiety, depression, burnout. That's what I deal with now, and that's why I went. And actually, just real quick, my whole process of going. It was after the pandemic, and I was working from home, and I
Mhm,
was incapable of concentrating.
mm,
And I'm like, why for all these years that I work in an office and not feel this? And I think it's because I just had natural distractions. So
mhm,
I was almost forced to be distracted there. And then at home, there's nothing. So I started looking up supplements or hacks to
yeah,
help me focus. And it kept coming up with ADHD medication. And I'm
mm,
like, huh. So I started researching it, went to my doctor, my primary care doctor, and I said, I think I have ADHD. And she said, well, let's do the screening. And it was the same
mhm,
kind of thing as you. It was like
yeah,
off the charts. And
yeah,
she's
yeah.
like, whoa, well, let's refer you. And so, like, just getting that diagnosis, and they prescribed me Adderall. And,
Mhm,
that was just what I needed. And it was a small dose. It wasn't like,
mm,
a huge
mhm,
deal,
mhm,
but it was just enough to clear my, thoughts and to be able
right.
to like do what I'm doing. And I was able to like really thrive because I quit my job and I was working from home and doing like my own business. And I had to have that or I wouldn't have
Mhm.
succeeded. So it's the diagnosis itself is life changing.
Yes, yes. And, just having that support, not only through a healthcare professional, but alongside of your own support system, whether it be your husband, a parent, your siblings. I mean, I blow up the sister friend chat. Like my sisters and I, we help and support each other. And neither one of my siblings have ADHD, but as we've all grown up together, we have, some shared experiences, good
Mhm.
and bad. And it is important that you have at least one or two people in your life that you can be very transparent with. you know, sometimes it's hard to be completely like you don't want to wear your spouse out, especially like in lockdown and quarantine. Like I just know for me, it's like, oh, another JR, my husband, he's like another, another day, another ADHD chat, And so that is another reason why I wanted to start this club and this channel
Yeah.
because and this room specifically because the right treatment helps ADHD, obviously, but your support system is important as well. And when ADHD goes untreated, and I guess we could probably wrap it up with this, you and I know what it's
Mhm.
like to go through not diagnosed, not treated, but it can be impossible it will affect your everyday life,
Yep.
not only your success, but your self-esteem. And it is different in children as in adults, but even like young adults, I had a lot of oppositional behavior in my
Mhm.
early 20s. It can come across as rebellion and disrespect. Not to mention all of the, what society considers markers for success, like doing well in school and, not taking risks, not
Mhm.
arguing, with either family or friends. Like those are all things that can happen when ADHD is not addressed. And so there is so much information out there. For the replay, I can put it in the back channel, some links. The American Psychological Association is a wealth of information about any mental health disorder. Just to kind of put the disclaimer on here, Amanda and I are not trained health professionals. We are ADHD warriors ourselves. So this is not, this is not a replacement for your regular healthcare provider, your mental health care provider, but there are resources available. Specifically in West Virginia, I use it often because now, in addition to being an ADHD overcomer each day, I'm now also a 12-step recovery sponsor, which I've been very open about on all my social media channels. It's not new, it's not brand new information, as they say on the show Friends, right? So,
Right.
because that was my easy button. That's how I self medicated, and I um, was able to do well for 2 or 3 years, especially after, getting back into school. But after I had my second baby, I started to struggle again
Mhm.
with the addictive behaviors, I would say. And that's when I found my recovery meeting, and the rest, as they say, is history. So,
Mhm.
again, not to be braggadocious, but I have not had any drugs or alcohol since June the 14th of 2014. And yay,
Awesome.
I always want to give myself a big clap for that because, and that may not be a deal. Your people are like, oh, that's not a big deal. Take it or leave it. Like,
It
people don't do the
is.
same
It is.
thing for mayonnaise, like what Jim Gaffigan says. He's like, nobody else gives you a hard time for turning down mayonnaise or mustard, which of course
Yeah.
we all know. Okay, so we have to kind of give the back story as well. Amanda's sister is married to my brother. So that is how our relationship originated, but it's so funny. I think we would have ended up friends anyway,
Yeah, I think
because
so
we
too.
just, have so many similar interests. We went to the same program through college, though of course mine was many years after you. But like how sis, which is, and even our kids, Amanda's kids and mine, call her Aunt Sis.
Uh huh.
And Amanda's oldest was the one who started that. We can thank him for that. It's a tradition that
Yes.
will continue now and for always.
For
But
always, forever, and
she
ever.
doesn't like right now and forever. She does not like mustard, and so she turns down mustard at a ball game or wherever we're at, and it's like no big deal, right? Why can you
Mhm.
not have mustard? Aunt Sis, are you addicted to mustard? Like nobody else does that, right?
Right.
It's not necessary.
Right.
And to hear even to say the word mustard to her, don't you love the reaction?
I do. And she won't even look at a bottle of mustard. She won't touch it. So I do give her a hard time about that. But I don't,
Yeah,
not in the
like
same
it
way.
should be right. It should be against the law, in her opinion.
Oh,
And
yeah, for
so,
sure.
but all that to say, to kind of, I always deflect and overcome with humor as well.
Mhm.
It's one of the, I made the decision, but not only because it was a part of my life that, it's not necessary anymore. When I got the help that I needed, I had no need to self medicate. And now
Mhm.
to drink alcohol would be counterproductive to the
Mhm.
medication. It would undo, it's a depressant. So if a depressed
Mhm.
person is trying to overcome that, and if you're struggling, if you have any mental health struggle whatsoever, alcohol is not the answer. Let's just say it that
Right.
way.
Right.
Well, Amanda, thank you so much for joining me. This is the first of hopefully many to come. Maybe next
Yeah, this
time I
was
could be a little bit
awesome.
more organized. I love it. Thank you. And of course, I love you. And
I
hopefully,
love you too.
what we are just in this together, right? So
We
hopefully
absolutely,
this
and
is,
I'm
yeah,
happy
this
to
can,
join in.
yeah. So I'll go ahead and schedule the room for next Friday. We'll do this on Fridays from 12 to 12:30. Hopefully, I'll be a little more organized with my thoughts. But let's be honest, ADHD, hashtag mom problems, mom brain,
Uh-huh.
all that stuff.
This is what
This is
you're
going to
gonna
be a,
get if you join this
it is. It's
chat.
like, this is the best that it gets. And it's going to be kind of, this is going to be a guilt free zone all the way around. And we don't want it to just be one of those things where it's like,
Yeah.
that we pigeonhole ourselves and saying, "Oh, only moms with ADHD can come in." I mean, this is going to be a Q&A time, a time to share. I am leaving the room open to where if anyone wants to come in and give their story about how they have struggled and overcome certain things. And I mean, we could even open it up. It may not be just ADHD. This I want it to be a guilt-free zone for mental health in general. So, Amanda, thank you so much
That sounds
again.
great. Yes, thank you for
Yeah,
inviting
and
me. We'll talk to
we'll
you next Friday.
anytime. Next Friday, talk then. Everyone take care
Bye.
and be safe. All right, bye.